You're listening to the Fresh Hell podcast. Fresh Hell contains stories of a disturbing and often graphic nature and is intended for a mature audience. Please don't let your kids listen to this, or they might turn out like us.
Hello, I'm Annie the American.
And I'm Johanna the Austrian. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Fresh Hell.
We are hopefully your favorite international podcast, and if you haven't listened to us before, we are co-hosts. We take turns choosing topics. If it's something we're both familiar with, like the recent Galapagos affair or Hinterkaifeck, then we're going to tell you about it together.
Yeah, but if it's a topic that one of us doesn't know, we tell each other and you, our most excellent listeners, at the same time.
Yeah, that's right. And we have never met in real life.
Yep, we were supposed to finally meet this fall, but then, 2020 happened and had other plans.
Yeah, it's all right. We'll just come for longer when we do come to visit, finally.
Just quickly, we also want to send our love and support to our Hellions on the West Coast right now. Please stay safe.
Yeah, we have a lot of friends in the Pacific Northwest and the Bay Area on the West Coast of the U.S., and there are just the most beautiful and devastating images coming in constantly. It seems like the entire West Coast is on fire. Yeah, it's bad. Stay safe, everyone.
It's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And before we start, quick shout out to Joel. Thank you for your lovely message. I'm happy your sister told you all about us. And we hope you enjoy your merch. Thanks for supporting us. We really do appreciate it. All right, so you have a case for me today that neither of us knew much about.
Yes. So I know sometimes I have an issue going off on research tangents. Sometimes. Just every once in a while. And it happened again. What I thought was a really simple, straightforward solo murder. It's actually one in a series. I think this is a pre-Jack the Ripper Victorian serial killer. But I'm going to tell you everything that I know, and then at the end, I'll be curious to see what you and our listeners think.
Well, that sounds interesting. Are there any warnings?
Yeah, all the warnings. It might be easier to tell you what I don't need to warn you about.
Okay, so it's a bad one.
Yeah. If we've warned you about something in the past, it's safe to assume it shows up in this episode. There's no cannibalism, as far as we know. And that's everything else, though. It's like domestic abuse, rape, murder, mutilation, child abuse, dismembering, stalking. It's bad. This one is really bad. It's bad. Do you think I've conveyed enough that it's bad?
I think
they understand it's bad.
Is it bad?
It's bad. It is.
It's bad,
It's
right?
bad. I just don't want anyone coming at us and being like, that one was bad. It's bad. All right.
I think they know it's bad.
Okay. All right.
I think you made it clear to us now.
Good. All right. So our story begins in the very small town called it's French-Canadian, right? So it's Saint Alexander, but it's probably Saint Alexandre. Well, I'm not 100% sure either. Someone lives there and they'll tell us what we got wrong, I'm sure. And it's a small but prosperous town. And according to, here's the source for this. It's Lippincot's Gazetteer. Like, instead of a gazette, it's Lippincot's Gazetteer of the World, a complete pronouncing gazetteer or geographical dictionary of the world containing notices of over 125,000 places. January 1st, 1895. Published by J.B. Lippincott.
That's a lot of places.
Yeah, it is. And this is what they had to say. Quote, Saint Alexandre, a post village in Iberville County, Quebec. I think that's what that means. 36 miles by rail southeast of Montreal. It contains 5 stores. Population 256. End quote. And that's it. That's pretty much all I could find on the town. I think the source title was longer than the amount of info it contained on the town, but it looks nice from the few photos I've seen. I think it was a French-speaking town. I'm just not 100% sure of that. There are a lot of areas in Canada where only French is spoken. All right. So on July 12th, 1867, Mrs. George Fountie and her daughter, 16-year-old Minnie Fountie, they left their home and walked into the village to run some errands. It was a walk of 2.5 miles, or about 4 kilometers, to reach town. When they arrived, they spent 2 or 3 hours buying and trading for items that they needed. When passing the post office, they crossed paths with a man who made some very inappropriate comments, and Mrs. Fountie told him that she'd have him arrested if he didn't stop. The ladies continued on with their day, and when they had finished their errands in town, they visited a friend where they stayed for supper. They left her house at 6:30 and headed for home. they never arrived. George was up worried all night, and the first thing the next morning, he was at his wife's friend's house, and she was horrified to hear that Minnie and her mother hadn't made it home. They had left at 6:30, and the walk home should have taken about an hour. Even if you say 2 hours, like if they're walking incredibly slowly, carrying a lot of parcels, which I don't think they were, but they should have been home before dark. So George immediately begins a search, and the entire town is helping, and they find something just unimaginable. Under a pile of brush in a pasture about 25 to 30 rods from the main road, they find both women. They're both dead, but 16-year-old Minnie has also been, quote, outraged, which was the term at that time for rape, and her genitals had been mutilated.
Oh, that's awful.
I know. And there's very little information about this case, partly, I think, because George didn't want any of the details out in public, which was common then. And also I think that I might have needed to search in French for old articles, and I've got maybe 3 phrases in French, and none of them are helpful in this situation. And I'm going to talk more about this murder and the source that I used to talk about this particular murder at the end of the next episode. So I'm going to circle back to the murder of Minnie Fountie and her mother. This is actually going to be a 2-episode story. And so at the end of next week's episode, we'll be circling back to this. So just keep it in the back of your mind. But yeah, this was just a really, really horrific double murder, and it involved, mutilation, which is something we don't see as often. So let me now take your mind off it for a moment and discuss the rod. That sounded naughty. Let's discuss the rod as a unit of measurement.
Still sounds a little bit wrong, but I think I know what you mean.
Do you know the length of a rod? Again, this sounds wrong.
So I think in German that would be called Rute, but in Austria we didn't have this measurement as far as I know. At least I personally never came across it in any historical context. So no, I have absolutely no idea how long a rod really is.
Well, that's something we have in common. So I looked it up thinking it would be simple, like a rod is 2.5 feet or it's half a meter squared or some shit. I don't know. And it's not. It's like the worst word problems of my youth come back to haunt me in adulthood, and I'm traumatized. So I'm just going to go ahead and read you the quote from my new best friend Wikipedia. Here's what I found about the rod. Quote, "The rod or perch or pole, sometimes also a lug, is a surveyor's tool and unit of length of various historical definitions, often between 3 and 8 meters. In modern U.S. customary units, it is defined as 16.5 U.S. survey feet, equal to exactly 1/320th of a surveyor's mile or quarter of a surveyor's chain, and is approximately 5.0292 meters. Sorry, approximately? That sounds pretty fucking accurate. 5.0292 meters? Okay. So it goes on. It says, the rod is useful as a unit of length because whole number multiples of it can form 1 acre of square measure. The perfect acre is a rectangular area of 43,560 square feet, bounded by sides 660 feet, a furlong long, and 66 feet wide, which is 222 yards, or equivalently 40 rods and 4 rods. An acre is therefore 160 square rods or 10 square chains." End quote. So now you tell me, how many apples does Jimmy have left? It's half your grade. Show your work or no points. You can't use your psychic abilities to guess the answer.
Jesus. I think I didn't understand half of the words you were saying because, first of all, the measurements, we don't have those.
Yeah.
But, okay.
It's a lot, right? That's a lot to fucking unpack. I just wanted to know what the length of a rod was. And then there's a crazy detailed wiki entry on the history and use, but it ends with, this is great. Quote, "Despite no longer being in widespread use, the rod is still employed in certain specialized fields. In recreational canoeing, maps measure portages, which is the overland path where canoes must be carried, in rods. Typical canoes are approximately 1 rod long." So that's really only useful if you know the length of a typical canoe. I don't know. Maybe that'll be a pub quiz question for one of us someday. In the United Kingdom, the sizes of allotment gardens continue to be measured in square poles in some areas, sometimes being referred to as simply poles rather than square poles. In Vermont, the default right-of-way width of state and town highways and trails is 3 rods, which is 49.5 feet or 15.0876 meters. Rods can also be found on the older legal descriptions of tracts of land in the United States. End quote.
So do you know what the length is now?
Yeah, it's the length of your average canoe. Yeah, that article just cleared everything up for me. I'm so glad I looked into it. I just felt I needed to include all the uses at the end or we'd get emails about gardens. Hats off to all the surveyors listening. We had our yard surveyed before we fenced it in, just to make sure we weren't putting fencing on, a neighbor's land. And I had no idea the life of a surveyor was a never-ending word problem.
I always imagined their job to be very difficult, and now I see why.
Right? So much math. And this case, the death of Mrs. Fountie and Minnie, is the one with the absolute least amount of information. I couldn't even find their given first names because Minnie could be short for a lot of different things. So I kept searching Wilhelmina, Minerva. There are lots of options, but I couldn't find anything. And we are going to circle back to this case at the end of the story. Like I said, I don't know. I just wish I could tell you more about the women.
I know. But sometimes we don't have that info, especially with these older cases.
Yeah, exactly. It's pretty common, but thankfully I do have some more information on the next case. So, Marietta Ball, she was a 20-year-old school teacher from St. Albans, Vermont on the Canadian border. The northernmost engagement of the Civil War, known as the St. Albans Raid, occurred here on October 19th, 1864. They say engagement, not battle, because it wasn't a sanctioned part of the war. A group of Confederate soldiers came up through Canada to surprise Union troops, and it's not a topic I did a deep dive into. That's a whole different podcast episode. There's a 1954 film called The Raid. It's got Anne Bancroft in it. I haven't seen it. I did read that St. Albans, Vermont is known for its craftsmen and Victorian-style homes, and the Vermont Maple Festival is held there every year. Have you had real maple syrup? I can send some if you can't get it there.
Yes, Annie, we can buy real maple syrup here, even from Canada. I think it's way harder to find the non-real stuff here, to be honest.
Oh, like Mrs. Buttersworth? Yeah. I know, you never know how easy it is to find things or, who has it. It's like bring your own Marmite when the British family visit because you can get it at the grocery store, but they don't always have it and it's incredibly expensive. I don't know. But yeah, one of my favorite breakfast places in Vermont is near the Killington ski slopes. It's called Sugar and Spice. And they serve everything with real maple syrup. And if you want the fake syrup, they charge you extra, which is the opposite of what the norm is. Like normally, if you go out here, it comes with, your regular table syrup. And then there's an upcharge of a couple of dollars if you want real maple syrup, which I always get. I love a waffle with real butter and real maple syrup. Now I want waffles. Okay, so this is the bad stuff. All right, George Fountie has lost both his wife and his daughter, and now we're moving on to the next murder. So 10 years have passed. Marietta Ball was a school teacher in St. Albans, Vermont. That's about 100 miles further north of Killington. It's on the Canadian border. And a lot of immigrants came to Canada because the passage was cheaper than coming directly to the United States. And then once they were in Canada, they crossed into the United States at St. Albans, which was a railway city. So you could get on a train headed for wherever your final destination might be. When our story takes place, there was a population of about 7,000 people living in St. Albans. Marietta's mother, Emily, had died when she was about 8, and her dad had never remarried. He'd raised their 7 children himself. Her older brothers, there was a 10-year age difference between Marietta and her oldest brother, and her older brothers had eventually moved to California. Her older sister was looking after her father, their father, whose health was not the best, and he had had to stop working because of his health, which then caused financial difficulty for the family. And so Marietta took the teaching position so that she'd be one less mouth that they needed to feed. Marietta was tall and slender, about 130 pounds, with light brown hair and blue eyes. She's 20 years old and described as a spinster, which it just makes me laugh. My first marriage certificate from England in 2004, it says I'm a spinster. I was 27, so that's fair, but 20, that's...
Wait, your marriage certificate says that you were a spinster?
Yes. Yeah, I'll take a picture of it for you.
Who even decides what the prime age for a woman is to be married? I guess it has something to do with fertility, but I hate the whole concept and the fact that there's no real male counterpart. Sorry for ranting, but I hate it. Why don't we put the ability of a man to lift heavy objects on the marriage certificate if we're at it?
I know. And the counterpart, it's So it lists Adam as a bachelor, which again, like a bachelor is like most eligible bachelor. Bachelor definitely, I feel like, has positive connotations.
Exactly.
Spinster, not so much. So I think it just means an unmarried woman of legally marriageable, is that a word? Legally marriageable age? Like you're immediately a spinster once you turn 18. Like once you can legally get married, if you're not married, it's fine. It's fine. Everything's fine. All right. So during the week, Marietta lodged with the Abels. They were a local family who lived near the school where she taught. But on the weekends, she would go and stay with her best friend Clara and Clara's husband, Foster Page. It was a slightly longer walk, about a mile along a generally deserted road that wound through the woods, but it was worth it for the company, and she made the trip most every weekend. Unfortunately, someone had noticed that she often took this route, and as she made her way to her friend's house on a warm July afternoon in 1874, someone was hiding, waiting, and watching, just off the road, in a dense, lush woods. And he suddenly stepped out of the woods, wearing a crudely made mask from a bit of carpet, and a violent struggle began. When Marietta didn't show up at the Pages', they began to worry a little bit. But she didn't always come, and remember, there weren't any phones at this time. So it's not like you could text someone or call them to see what was happening. And as time passed, Mrs. Page, Clara, she was getting really worried about her friend. And so they started to walk the way she'd have come, and pretty soon a search party had formed. Now, I've read that they found her that night, or in the next morning, really, I guess, at 1 a.m. And I've also read that another full day passed between when the search started and when she was found. But either way, Frank Harris, he was a young black man, a freed slave who'd worked for Foster Page and or rented a house on their property. He called out that he had found something, and he had found something terrible.
Oof, I'm guessing that would be an issue even in places in the north after the war.
Oh, yeah. Yep. So the North fought for the side that brought an end to keeping humans as slaves, but there was a very healthy Vermont chapter of the KKK. New England has plenty of racists. I'm not going to pretend otherwise because we were on the right side of history. This isn't news to anyone. It's just another terrible aspect in this whole terrible story. I just don't want our Southern listeners to think that I don't. I get it. All right. So this poor Mr. Harris, he finds Marietta's body, and she is posed. She's on her back with her ankles crossed and her arms by her side like she's lying in a casket. And her skirt is up wrapped around her head, hiding her terribly fractured skull. It was obvious that she had been raped, or as the papers called it, quote, outraged. It was too bad a thing to even say the word. It's like they wouldn't say the word rape, and here we are over 100 years later with Brock fucking Turner, right? Like, flames down the side of my face,
I know. In German, I'd say an equivalent word would be geschändet, which you could translate to disgraced. So you can disgrace a woman by raping her, but you can also disgrace a piece of art by painting over it. You know what I mean? It's, isn't that just sad? Yep. I hate the word. It's horrible.
No, it's awful. I agree. And the fact that a girl's virginity is treated like something that already belongs to an unknown future husband, not good. Not good.
Yeah, but back to your case. Was there much evidence?
There really wasn't. So apart from the crude mask, that mask alone is a fucking nightmare. So it was like a piece of Victorian carpeting with eye holes cut into it, and then the sides had, so imagine like you've got a rectangular piece of carpet and you fold it in half, so now it's whoever had made it had stabbed little holes in the side and stuck twigs through to hold the two pieces together. And it's just, I don't know, it's creepy. It reminds me of the Scarecrow in The Dark Knight Rises. Just creepy.
Didn't we already have a case with such a crude face mask? I'm really trying to remember, but I don't know.
Oh, I think you're right. I think there might have been. Oh, was it the Hammersmith ghost with the sheet that we're thinking of? I can't remember. I think you're right.
Also in the Ursula Herrmann's case, I think they found a mask, wasn't it?
Yes. Yep.
I think
you're right. I'm sure one of our listeners is going to know and remember. Yeah. But you are definitely the official memory in this duo. It's not chronic migraine, PTSD, fibro, fog, nightmare over here. Yeah, some days I just want to pat myself on the back for remembering to breathe all day. It's fine. I'm fine. Okay, so apart from the discarded mask, there were obvious signs of a struggle where she had fought very hard and had been dragged into the woods. There was also a lot of blood and bloody rocks around the area, likely what she had been struck with The cause of death seems to have been strangulation. They found her hair ribbon and her watch, which had stopped at 4:20, which is when we assume she died. But there was nothing left by the killer apart from that creepy mask and some DNA.
Yeah, which wasn't very helpful. Wasn't a thing yet.
Yeah, exactly. Mr. Harris was thankfully exonerated with an airtight alibi, and he was released from jail.
So they had locked him up.
Yeah, I think the same day he found her body. I think they immediately locked him up. There are two ways to look at that action, and neither are great. The first being that they thought he was guilty. He had found the body and he was black, so that's all they proof they needed. The second is that they locked him up for his own protection so that the townspeople wouldn't decide on their own to lynch him. So that one just feels racist no matter how you look at it. Although, to be fair, they wanted to lynch white people too at that time. Anybody responsible for this stuff, they were...
Yeah, they just like to take matters in their own hands.
Exactly. Yep. And so, unsurprisingly, once he was released from jail, he fucked off to Maine for a few years.
Yeah, can't blame him.
Me neither. I think it was pretty wise to nope out of there the way he did. Nothing good would have come of it. He did eventually return to the area. So the town offered a $3,000 reward for information of the killer. They'd had another stabbing not long before Marietta's murder. A French-Canadian man was passing back through town. He had been to Holyoke, Massachusetts, near where I originally grew up. And he was trying to get back home to Canada. And he had been stabbed by some vagrants. And the city didn't want this reputation of being unsafe. And we have a few more suspects to talk about, but first, here's a quick word from our sponsor, Best Fiends.
That's right, because this episode is brought to you by Best Fiends. Best Fiends is a fun puzzle game with currently over 5,000 levels, and guess what? Every week 30 new levels are added, so you definitely never get bored. I'm currently at level 1336, and now I'm working on upgrading my favorite fiends so I can pass the next level. And not only are there new levels added each week, there are also special events like the current Golden Wheel Race. The biggest plus for me is the fact that I don't need Wi-Fi or a mobile connection to play Best Fiends. Since I moved to the countryside, my Wi-Fi can be, let's say, problematic at times. But it doesn't matter, as I can play with my fiends whenever and wherever I have a few minutes to spare. In our Facebook group, our Hellions are now comparing their levels and are adding each other as in-game friends. Engage your brain with fun puzzles and collect tons of cute characters. Trust me, with over 100 million downloads, this 5-star rated mobile puzzle game is a must-play. Download Best Fiends free on the Apple App Store or Google Play. That's friends without the R. Best Fiends.
Okay. So another suspect was a French-Canadian man known as Joseph Lepage or Joseph Laplante or Lapais or Paget. He went by a bunch of different names. He was Quebecois and he had moved to St. Albans, Vermont with his wife and 5 children in September of 1871. A railroad employee let the authorities know that he had inquired about train times with scratches on his face pretty soon after Marietta's body was discovered, and local authorities thought that he was a problem. They knew he beat his wife, and there were rumors, of course, that he had left Canada because he was a wanted man. But rumors aren't evidence, and there wasn't any actual evidence against him. He said that the scratches on his face were poison ivy that he had gotten while berry picking at the time of the murder, and several men corroborated that, and so he too was let go.
Were they the only suspects?
There is one other suspect of note. He was a governor's son, and there were rumors of just an incredible cover-up. The story went that George Smith, the son of wealthy and influential former New Hampshire state senator and governor J. Gregory Smith, had gone to a dance at a hotel, and Marietta had been there. They had exchanged words, and he said he'd murder her. Something along those lines, depending on which rumor you heard. Yeah, he fancied her, and he was mad that she didn't return his feelings.
I wish that wouldn't happen still nowadays, but...
This has been going on for forever. So people were reporting that he'd visited her at her boarding house. People were reporting that they'd seen him driving a carriage near the site of the murder. And it just went on with the rumors and speculation for about a year. And finally, George Smith had just fucking had it, and he demanded a public hearing. So at the hearing, one by one, people came forward to talk about and testify about what they had heard. And one by one, George proved with his own witnesses that they were all rumors. If there was a dance at the hotel, he hadn't gone to it. He had never visited Marietta at her boarding house. He had not been driving a carriage in the area when she was murdered. The witness later admitted that he hadn't actually seen George, just a passing wagon he thought might have belonged to George. One by one,
Jesus.
he proved, I know, this poor guy, he proved all the rumors and speculation about him to be false. The authorities said he was never a serious suspect of investigation. It wasn't him, and he had finally put those rumors to rest. So, yeah, it's just like, oy. There were other suspects. There was a man that apparently had wanted her hand in marriage who she had refused. So after they arrested the black man, then they arrested the Irish man, they arrested anybody poor. It was sort of the standard, like, xenophobic playbook, right? It's like anybody who's not, you know, white, Christian of means, English speaker, suspect. So, yeah. And they upped the reward to $6,000, but the crime went unsolved. So in the meantime, the people of St. Albans were understandably upset and afraid, and somebody in their area would have committed a crime like this. And so they contacted Sleeping Lucy, a noted psychic. She's pretty fascinating. So she was born Lucy Ainsworth in 1819 in Calais.
France.
Yeah, nope, Vermont. There's a Calais, Maine, too, I think. They probably pronounce it Calais.
Of course there is.
I'm probably pronouncing it wrong, too. And it's right up on the Canadian border. Most of this information comes from a 2016 article about Sleeping Lucy by Paul Heller for the Times Argus. So Lucy was one of 9 children, and by 1827, so when she was 8, the family was homeless and destitute, and the children were all placed in foster homes and then expected to learn a trade to contribute to their upkeep. Lucy learned straw bonnet making as a young child and eventually learned to make tailor-made clothing. To quote Heller's article, quote, "The demands of the tailoring trade were too much for her, and she became ill, requiring bed rest and the ministrations of local physicians. MacDonald Newkirk's pamphlet on Lucy indicates that she became so seriously ill that her physicians gave up all hope of saving her life. Eventually falling into an unusually deep sleep, Lucy heard a voice tell her that she would get well if she drank a medicine prepared in a certain way. In a loud voice, she repeated these instructions, and her brother George heard them. The recipe was administered, and Lucy began a rapid improvement." End quote. Now, to be fair, most medical treatments at that time ranged from ineffective to downright dangerous. You know, it was the age of bloodletting and ingesting mercury, so the article points out what anyone who listened to our Victorian Death Trip episode already knows. Odds are her herbal remedies were at least generally safer than what the actual medical doctors had to offer a patient. So, yeah. But she was a psychic. So again, this is from the Times Argus article. Quote, "A news item from the May 23, 1872, St. Albans Messenger reported the body of Miss Nellie Jewett of Claremont, New Hampshire, who mysteriously disappeared 3 weeks ago last Thursday, was found in Sugar River above the lower dam belonging to the Monadnock Mills Company. It was discovered in the place where Mrs. Lucy A. Cook, Sleeping Lucy, of Montpelier, who had been consulted as to the whereabouts of the body, said it would be found." End quote.
So she was more than just a medical clairvoyant?
Yes, she worked with people and authorities on everything from health tonics to finding lost items and people.
An all-rounder.
Yeah. Just wait, you're going to love it, because she keeps getting more powers. So the article goes on to say, quote, "Dorman Kent, in a radio broadcast from September 3rd, 1936, recounted a family story. My grandfather Kent long ago owned a large farm, a store, a shoe shop, and a blacksmith shop. He was a man with considerable business on his hands for a country resident. He was accustomed to carry a good deal of money with him, and one day discovered his billfold was not on his person. Saying nothing to anyone, he hunted for that pocketbook with some $200 or $300 in it, off and on for 3 or 4 days. He had known Sleeping Lucy since she was a child, so he drove 10 miles to Montpelier to consult her. He simply told her he had lost a pocketbook with some $200 or $300 in it, probably on his farm or near there. She closed her eyes, as she always did, and went into a trance. She said that the pocketbook was in somebody's pants. Whose pants? My grandfather asked. She didn't know whose pants, but she said she saw a long brown billfold in the hip pocket of a pair of pants hanging in a closet. She said it was a long closet, there was a small window in the end of it, and there was one grip and several pairs of shoes on the floor, and the door opened with a knob. She had never been in my grandfather's house, and he had told no one he had lost anything before he saw her. He paid her, drove home, went upstairs, opened a closet door with a knob on it. It was a long closet with a window at the end, and there was a grip on the floor. There were several shoes on the floor, and in a pair of grandfather's pants was the pocketbook intact. Sleeping Lucy never claimed to be a fortune teller, a mind reader, or a spiritualist. She always said she did not believe in spiritualism in any way, and she would never leave her home to be consulted. End quote.
George Bailey could have used her.
Right. So Mary Baker Eddy, who would later gain fame as the founder of the Christian Science Church, local to this area, she was a serious believer of Lucy's powers. Lucy consulted with doctors and eventually started her own practice. She married, had a daughter, was widowed, remarried, lived in the Boston area for a while. She also became known for being able to heal broken bones with her hands. So she would just lay hands on you and your bones would knit back together, I guess. Yeah, her brother had a big, psychic thing, too. He had pictures made of himself walking on water, and I think he set himself up as a doctor and did these psychic cures. But she's interesting. Her life is fascinating, and she's buried at the absolutely beautiful Mount Auburn Cemetery in Cambridge. So I will link to some articles about her, and we have a portrait of Lucy to post as well.
Okay, and so they contacted her about Marietta's murder.
No, she has nothing to do with this case. I just thought she was interesting. Sorry. Yeah, they did. So Sleeping Lucy said that the killer had lain in wait at the side of the road and that he had arrived there by walking through the woods so he wouldn't be seen by anyone on the road. She said that the rape and murder had happened right on the side of the road and that the body had been dragged further into the woods. She said that the killer was from the French community. She described him and his house, and she said that the victim's missing underwear could be found a mile from the crime scene, buried under a log. She said that the murder happened around 4 p.m., and the killer had taken a circular route that brought him past a sawmill. And that was it. That was it for suspects. Marietta's case went cold. Her father left town after her funeral. His sons had sent money from California, so he paid his debts and he took a train out west to live with them. And there is a podcast called These Dark Mountains that I found. I found their website. And it links to their episode about this murder. I'm going to listen to it after we record, and I will link to it, so please check it out. But on their blog post, they say that, quote, on August 7th, 1875, a monument was placed at the site consisting of a white marble column with the following inscription: Marietta N. Ball, married July 24th, 1874, age 20 years. Passing along this highway from the school which she was teaching, it is supposed that she was assailed by a masked villain from an ambuscade, was taken to a thicket midway between the road and this spot, and killed by blows on her head. Her body was then taken here, laid out, and was found at 1:00 a.m., July 26th, end quote. The N in her name stands for Nye. Her middle name was Nye, Marietta Nye Ball. She was buried in Greenwood Cemetery. Her headstone is an obelisk. It's one of the fancier ones in the cemetery. Also in that cemetery are members of the Massachusetts 54th Regiment. So if you've seen Glory, that film was about the freed black men of the Mass 54th. They fought for the Union even after they were lied to about receiving equal pay and were routinely used as literal cannon fodder. There's a beautiful sculpture for them near the State House in Boston Common. And that is probably, I think, a good place to stop for today. Next week, we have another terrible murder, the most disturbing one yet. And we've got a trial and an execution to talk about. This is a terrible case. Or cases. And I definitely can't wait for next episode to hear the end of it. Yeah. I wasn't expecting to find all of this. So everything in this episode today, this is sort of it's like the Villisca murders again, right? It's like I have to do all the other things that happened before this thing happened because I think they're all linked. Yeah. What's your something good this week?
Should I start or do you want to start?
Please. I'm sick of listening to my own voice.
My something good this week. On Thursday, I met with a friend who I hadn't seen in 13 years. We met when I was living in Mexico. She was also married to a Mexican and was working with us in the same hotel. And yeah, we kept in contact over Facebook. You know how it is. She's from Germany. She moved back to Germany a while later, and she came to Vienna.
Nice.
And we went for a drink on a rooftop bar, which was nice. And then we went to a Mexican dinner, which was also perfect. It was so lovely catching up again. And wow, so many crazy things happened. I could make a whole episode about that. But it was lovely. It was lovely.
That's awesome.
What's yours?
All right. This might sound weird, but my something good this week are sheets. I'm kind of a sheet snob, and I got that way in my last house. So actually, in that house, like this house, I had no linen closet. So I had just one really good set of wedding sheets that I would wash and then put back on the bed every weekend. But then a couple of years ago, my friend Misty, we'd been talking about wanting linen sheets, and she was at a factory outlet and found some, and so she picked up a set for herself and some for me, and I am obsessed. They're linen, they're 100% linen sheets. They are my favorite warm weather sheets, although I like them year round. I love flipping my pillow to the cool side. Can we just take a moment to appreciate flipping your pillow to the cool side?
Yeah, it's the best.
It's the best. And the linen, it just gets softer with every wash. It's wrinkled as hell, but I don't care, and I'm not ironing sheets. My friend April used to do that. But yeah, linen sheets. I don't know. Are there any other sheet snobs out there? I spend a lot of time in bed. Like, I legitimately spend a lot of time in bed. Don't skimp out on your sheets or your bed. Skimp out on lots of other stuff, but not that. So, if you're a sheet snob, tell me what your favorite brands are, please. And now I'm going to ask you to end this, because I think everyone's heard enough of me today.
So I have to beg again for reviews.
Yeah.
Please leave a review if you can. Please tell your friends about us if you think they would be interested in our voices and in our stories. You can find our merch store, ways to listen, and ways to get in touch with us. All that info is on our website, www.freshhellpodcast.com. Please come say hi in our Facebook group. It is such a nice group. It's lovely, really. We talk about everything from house porn to the most macabre, horrible stories.
Yeah.
Except politics. There's no politics.
None. Nope. Doesn't matter whether we agree with it or not, it gets deleted.
Exactly.
Everything goes. No politics.
We're gonna keep it politics free.
Yeah.
Yes, say hi to your pets. We love them.
We do. And if you are going through hell,
keep going. Tschüss.
See you next week.